Now, I know I'm wading into muddy water when I talk about the church as a moral community. The idea that the church could claim to read the mind of God and shape our moral lives accordingly should make us squirm in our seats a bit. Many people, many churches are tempted to give up before we start. There are just too many pitfalls for a community to take responsibility for the moral lives of its members. For starters, we can't agree on the details of what's right or wrong. And even if we could agree on the content of our moral code, it's a long shot to get the process right, to shape the personal moral lives of our members. We stand a good chance of getting it wrong on both counts, content and process. Furthermore, in a culture of hyper-individualism that worships individual freedom and autonomy, how dare a church even suggest that we might have something to say about how people go about living their own lives? Especially now with a widespread distrust of any cultural institution, not just the church, and with churches everywhere losing ground in terms of cultural influence, in terms of raw numbers like attendance and giving, it's understandable that many contemporary American churches try to lower expectations of members for fear of offending the loyal remnant and losing even more ground. Many American churches, I fear, have already caved in to crass consumerism. They position themselves as a marketplace for religious goods and services that the consumers want. Concert-style performance worship with high-tech special effects, comfortable theater seating in darkened rooms, so each worshiper can be in their own little world, taking in, consuming what's happening in the performance space up on stage. And the cafes and bookshops in the lobby have all kinds of products to satisfy the customer. There's barely a suggestion, much less an expectation, and certainly no pressure to notice worshipers around you and enter deeply into their lives. So that sort of church is not really a community of moral formation. It's a collection of individuals in a religious marketplace having a spiritual experience at the same time. And then the customers walk out of the Christian supermarket and go off to do life on their own until they come back to get a refill next Sunday. Yes, I know. You can call me on it. I'm being too cynical. I'm overstating to make a point. Things aren't this extreme everywhere. Most congregations do at least try to take spiritual formation and discipleship seriously. And no, I won't claim that just because Parkview doesn't have theater seating or a fog machine or a coffee shop, that we aren't also tempted to make church into a religious marketplace. We need to be on guard continually. We are human, and we breathe the same air and drink the same water of our surrounding culture. So we can't help but be influenced by consumerism. We are also prone to cater to individual religious experience and individual religious customers. We may also be afraid to set the bar too high, because if we start to talk too much about communal moral formation or about living a sacrificial life that goes against the flow, or start drawing boundaries that society is not drawing, people will start shopping around for a better deal. Because there are better deals out there. If by deal we mean a church that gives more while demanding less. So our temptation, my temptation as a church leader, will always be to demand a little less and give more, to keep people coming through the doors and supporting our programs. So that's the tension that I'm trying to name. A church wanting to build up its program and numbers, and what church doesn't, hesitates to push very hard for more communal moral formation. But I also say it doesn't have to be this way. I want to make the case that a flourishing life, a good life, an attractive life, is actually a disciplined life deeply embedded in a community. It is a life that does not lean away but leans toward the practice of mutual moral formation. A community whose members ask a lot of each other and give a lot to each other. It's a community calling people to the good life. It's a community who is living out the vision of the writer of Hebrews, who urged the church in today's reading, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, and let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. I couldn't have said it better. Let's provoke each other and do it all the more. We are a provocative community. We are a community that provokes its members to love and good deeds. I love that word, provoke. And no, it does not mean to get somebody mad. That's only one specific kind of provocation. Provoke is from the Latin provocare. Vocare is to call, as in vocation, our calling, or being vocal, using our mouth to call out. And the prefix pro means forth. So provocare is to call forth. To provoke someone is to call forth some kind of action or response. The writer of Hebrews urges us as the church, don't be lackadaisical in your relationships. Live together in a way that doesn't allow people to be static or passive or lethargic. Put a fire under them. Do things or say things around them that provoke a response in them, that provoke love and good deeds. Love them in a way that makes them want to love more. Do good in a way that makes them want to do good more. And when they struggle with something pulling them down or causing a moral failure, live around them in a way that raises them back up. Provoke each other to love and good deeds. And all the more as things around us start falling apart. As the day approaches, as the Hebrews writer says. With the multiple global moral crises that are facing us today, now is not a season to back off of our communal moral calling, to crawl into a hole and hope it all passes and that we all miraculously somehow survive. No, now is the time for active, communal, and mutual moral formation. In a world that is at sea, a community like this one is a precious gift to anyone who wants to live a flourishing life. We are not on our own to navigate life. We have a community to walk with us, hard as it is. We have people who love us too much to let us off the hook too easily when it comes to living up to our high calling as humans. That's the kind of community I'm glad to be part of. One that loves me unconditionally the way I am and expects continued growth and maturation and transformation. One that calls out the very best in me, that provokes me toward becoming the human being God designed me to be. I believe if we stop and think about it, we would all want that, wouldn't we? Yes. But again, I say with some caution, as flawed people living in flawed communities, it's hard to pull off. There's the theory, and then there's the practice. So let's look at a story of the people of God trying to practice it. In the book of Nehemiah, the Jewish people had just returned to Jerusalem after some generations in exile. So they had forgotten about everything about the law of God. Their communal moral formation languished while they were uprooted and living away in a pagan land, separated from their scriptures, separated from their religious rituals, and they suffered from a mass collective forgetfulness. So while they were back home and rebuilding and repairing the temple, they found the scroll, the Torah, their scriptures, in a pile of rubble. And in that scroll, they would rehear and relearn what God desired of them as a people. And this is how it went down. They called everyone together. 50,000 people, we are told earlier in the book. And they gave them their book back, their holy book. Not literally. They didn't pass out 50,000 copies of a Gideon Testament and tell them, go home and read it and obey it. That's how we might do it, modern individualists that we are. They took a different approach. We heard Steve valiantly read that passage to us from Nehemiah 8. Ezra and 12 other people, 6 on his right, 6 on his left, read the scroll aloud to the people for 6 hours. And then those 12 plus 14 more worked with the people to make sense out of what they heard. And all are listed by name. I told Steve I expected him to read all 26 names. The fact that they're all named is significant. It shows how important these interpretation assistants were. Exactly how these 26 interpreters did their work, we aren't told those details. The story implies that they fanned out among the people and worked in smaller groups, worked together at the task of interpreting, understanding, discerning. I mean, how else do you lead a 50,000 person Bible study? Whatever it was not a private reading for private consumption. It was community work. It was the combined work of the whole people. A people moved by the Spirit of God to seek the word and will of God together. The result was so powerful that 50,000 people fell on their faces and wept. The emotion of remembering and reconnecting with something deep within them that they had lost overpowered them, and they wept for joy. They had a sense of coming home to the people they were meant to be. And that is an overwhelmingly joyful reality. Some of you have felt that, to discover that you are living the life you were meant to live. Discovering and interpreting the Word and will of God is the task of the whole church, working together in community. It is a task in which we all have an obligation to participate. This is not a job we delegate to preachers and professors and tell them to go do the work and come back and report to us. Wrestling with and knowing God's will for our life here and now is our job as a community that we must do together if we want to call ourselves a moral community. But too often we cop out. And this happens all along the theological spectrum, on the left and the right and in between. I call it biblical moral individualism. And it takes different forms. There is the God said it, I believe it, that settles it form, which actually denies any need for interpretation. If God said it, I believe it, that settles it, then we don't really actually need a community to wrestle with the question of what God's will is for this time and this place. And there's also the however you want to read it is fine with me form of moral individualism, where every individual takes from the text whatever seems helpful to them from their unique perspective. It's kind of a therapeutic deism. The God you most want is the God you should have. Moral individualism is user-friendly. It's low demand. Doesn't need to take seriously the wisdom of the tradition and the history of where we are located. It doesn't need to account for the wisdom of other traditions and other times and contexts. And it doesn't need to account for the real and present community of people that we are in real and present relationships with. It may be low demand, but if I isolate myself from my own wisdom tradition and from the tradition of others and from my own human community, then I believe I'm also less likely to discover the life that I was meant to live and less likely to come into a place of joy and flourishing. There's an echo of this in Jesus in Matthew 18. We often pull out Matthew 18 as a problem-solving text, as a procedural checklist to slap on any human relationship problem, and voila, church conflict solved. Moral ambiguity cleared up. Pastoral dilemma avoided. But actually, it doesn't work that way in real life. It's not a checklist. It's a guiding principle. It tells us we are not on our own. We are part of a moral community, and community matters. Matthew 18 operates on the assumption that church communities will care about each other's spiritual well-being, and that we will all work at it together in love and in honesty until there is some resolution, some peace, some way forward that we can imagine together. We misuse Matthew 18 if we see it as a rigid three-step procedure, and that if we apply the steps and it doesn't work, then we are free to publicly shame and discard the offender. No, instead, what this text emphasizes for us all is that community moral formation matters. We're not alone on our journey toward wholeness and shalom. Jesus is calling here for close relational accountability. When I am in honest and close and healthy communal relationships, I will be giving account of my life to that community naturally and continually, as will everyone in that community, because accountability is simply honest conversation. The very basis for community and the basis for the good life is to have people to tell your stories to. It's to have people who are ready and willing to listen to your account of your life and are also ready and willing to give you theirs. So let us expect more of each other, not less. Let us give more to each other, not less. And let us provoke each other more and not less. Provoke toward love and good deeds, toward the good life. Let's turn to hymnal worship book number 420. We're going to sing these words of aspiration. Heart with loving heart united, met to know God's holy will. May we all so love each other and all selfish claims deny, so that each one for the other will not hesitate to die. Kindle in us love's compassion, so that everyone may see in our fellowship the promise of a new humanity. Let's sing.